welcome back to another episode of Making It. My name is Mirabelle, and today I'm chatting with filmmaker, director, author, YouTuber, Zach Ramelan. It's funny as I'm making this intro and putting all these labels on him because, right off the bat, we get into talking about who we are aside from the labels we're given. So anyway, Zach is, he's all of that and more. I found him I saw his screening of his film at Buffer Festival in 2019, which I want to say is like a film festival for YouTube creators, and it's really cool. I kept up with his YouTube videos, learned that this year he released a book, which of course I picked up, and we talk about that in this episode. It's called The Unoriginal Guide to Originality, and you can find it on Amazon if it interests you. We talked a lot about authenticity, about making an impact with our work, with our creations, and a lot of the parallels between creating music and creating a film. As I'm primarily a musician and he's primarily a filmmaker, I was kind of surprised that there were so many things that we could relate on, and it was really cool to be able to have this kind of talk with somebody so creative, and it was really interesting. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please rate and review the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you're listening to this. Like the video on YouTube if you're watching there. If you're watching here, I don't know what I'm supposed to say there. Yeah, feel free to leave a comment, say hello, follow me on Instagram, follow the podcast, follow Zach everywhere. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Making It.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I like how, so I picked up your book, the guide to, what is it called? Sorry, I have it right here. The Unoriginal Guide to Originality. On the back of your book, it's all about how to be your authentic self kind of thing. And you talk about how not to drown in life's tall glasses of influence, aka the social medias, the YouTubes, and all the goddamn podcasts out there. So I posted that on Instagram. I was like, Zach, what are you talking about? Why are you shitting on podcasts? Do you want to come on mine? Here we are.
Yeah, it's funny. The in fact, I feel like I've poking at podcasts, but just poking at everything, I think as a creative, whether you're up and coming or someone who's been, at it for years, it doesn't matter what you look at for inspiration or sort of those highlight things that you try to watch, to even like escape, they all influence you. And I realized that there's just so much content out there right now. And I needed a sort of guide in order for me to navigate around all of these influences, whether it was the 50 podcasts that I'd be listening to or the dozens of YouTube videos. And that's what this book was. So it's not directly riffing on podcasts specifically. It's riffing on everything. Mm-hmm. So you're not the only one I'm poking at.
No, it's sweet though. Reading through it, it was like, it's nice that somebody has organized my thoughts for me, because like it makes sense what you talk about, but I don't think I've ever been able to put things into words and such. And so it's a pretty good book, I'd say.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's still, people are still like reading it because we just released it about a month ago. So people are still kind of biting down on it. So it's good to hear someone else's opinions other than the crazy ones in my own head, because I've looked at this book for the last 4 years. It's been like this ongoing journey. I started writing it when I was just getting into doing YouTube stuff. So a lot of the thoughts were like, how do I navigate this path of making online content? So now 4 years later, I'm still wondering, like, is this information relevant? Is this sort of timeless information? And from what I've been gaining from people who have now picked up the book, started reading it and sending messages, and including yourself, it is kind of voicing those thoughts that many of us up and coming creatives, or even just established creatives, go through, which is those tall glasses of influence that we're overwhelmed with.
Yeah. So I thought that you maybe wrote this book because talked about how, like, a lot of people have commented on your YouTube channel of how you were copying Peter McKinnon, or that's what it seemed like. So I figured that your book kind of came from, after that time period, not kind of at the beginning of your whole journey.
Yeah, so and it's so funny because it's like I feel like that was the beginning for me, because when I was getting called out, I really didn't know who I was as an artist, and I felt like I'd come out of making some short films and even making my own feature film. So I understood the film world, and in the YouTube space, because it was so foreign to me, I think as any sort of creatives who doesn't know their established path, they like to follow in the shadow of other established creators because they've blazed the trail, and it's much easier to walk in someone else's trail than it is to carve out your own. It's sketchy. It's weird. It's like going into a forest without a path. You'd rather go down the path that a million people have walked down than be like, I'm going to walk through this path and I don't know if there's a grizzly bear, but I'm going to go. It's scary and it's terrifying. And when you walk in the exact same footprints as someone else's trail, someone's going to be like, hey, like, you're doing the same thing someone else has done. You're actually doing the same thing thousands of other people are now doing. And as soon as I started to pivot from that, I really felt like that's my beginning. That's where I really started, because I've been doing this for so long, but I really feel like the beginning of my journey was figuring out who I was authentically. And that was about 4 years ago today.
Oh, sweet. Today.
I mean, that was a dramatic statement. I don't think it's exactly today. That was just me trying to make something that sounded quotable.
No, but yeah, that's awesome. DJ asked, I couldn't decide between asks and asked.
You're being original about it. You created your own word. That's fine. Asked.
There we go. So he asked, what is something that you consider to be authentically you?
Now, is that directed at me specifically, or just like people in general? Like, how do you find
you?
Me? Something
specifically
that's
at you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good question. And it comes with a bit of a story that goes attached to it. But I recently went on my first ever retreat a few months ago. Typically, as a videographer, I've filmed many retreats. I've been on many of them as like a working person, but to actually go on one as like my own self-experience, I was kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. And I went on this trip. No one knew who I was. No one knew anything about me. And what that did was, and I've never actually been in a situation where I wasn't known as something, like typically we go in, and that's not like saying how big I am or whatever I am. I mean, we all go into environments to where we're recognized for what we are, right? You go in with a sibling, well, you're the brother of someone. You go in with your parents, well, you're someone's son. You go in with your partner, you're that person's girlfriend or boyfriend. And I've always been someone something or something to someone. So either I'm Zach the filmmaker, Zach the brother. In this 1 week, I was Zach, and I didn't know who I was authentically. Who am I stripped down from all these characters that I wear? And I never had actually done this practice, even though I wrote a whole book about it. I've gone on a lot of self-exploration trips. I never gone into a room where no one knew anything about me. And by the end of the week, people were sharing what they gained from who Zach was, unfiltered by any of those other things that I decide as my identity. And at least what I got from other people's interpretation now, and what I've sort of clinged on to, is a lot of people said that I'm very loving. I'm just like a loving person, which was really beautiful. Because if I were to explain myself, I'd be like, I'm a filmmaker and I like to adventure and I like creativity.
Yeah.
But if we just describe ourselves on our interests, we're not really authentic, right? Because everyone has the same interests. Right? You're a musician. And if someone's like, oh, hey, like, who are you? And if you say you're a musician, well, so are millions of other people. But that doesn't mean you're not authentic or real. It's just because you're categorizing yourself off of an easy template that most of us do. But it's when we dig deep into those, like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And like really diving deep, that's when we really start to realize like, oh, I'm like love, or I'm like a happy ball of fire, and whatever that means. So kind of bouncing around, those were kind of the answers that I got. I also, shared that I was like a leader. I was optimistic. And as much as that's other people's interpretations of who I am, I really clinged on to those. So a long story for one answer.
No, that's awesome. We love getting deep into these things.
Oh, I'm very deep, by the way. I almost like to a fault. So if I start going too deep, you just let me know.
Oh no, we go there on my Twitch streams. We started asking these questions of the day. I don't know why this question came up, but we were talking about our strengths, and I was asking the chat, and I was asking myself also, and it like makes us really uncomfortable to talk about all this stuff. So that was like the first time we got super deep, and the chat was like, "Oh my gosh, everybody's really revealing things about themselves," and it was great. It's really interesting. We love it.
It's good to get deep, and I feel that we all like getting deep. It's just, sometimes it's not the best environment for it, but I feel like everyone wants to like dig into things, because when we're not talking to someone about it, we're thinking it. We're going into those spots with or without people. So
True.
I'm happy that you hold the space to do that. That's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I suppose that like I don't really know, like this question came up recently also, not the exact question that DJ asked, but kind of been thinking about like how do I define myself, stripping myself from all of these labels. And I'm not sure I have an answer for that yet, but it's like something that I'm starting to think more about now.
How you define yourself? Was it a question, or was it like a question directed, like who's you in this situation?
Yeah,
you?
basically who am I, without saying that I'm a musician, okay, but like without that, what am I? Who am I without all these labels?
So one of the tools that I sort of dove into writing the book, which I'd love to do this practice with you now, is you're not an accumulation of your interests, you're a makeup of your motives. So they are the things that get you up out of bed. They are your why. So when you think about it, and the best way to get to the why, which this is how you can get super deep really quick, and we don't have to go 5 whys deep, but even like 3 whys deep, you get pretty good, which is like, I'm a musician. So why are you a musician?
I love making music.
Why do you love making music?
Because I'm able to express my thoughts and feelings through the music.
Why is expressing your thoughts and feelings important to you?
So that things are not just bottled up inside, and I feel like we have to process emotions to be able to live,
So you're getting pretty damn close to a good why there, which is expressing your thoughts and feelings and emotions. And if you were to dive, 2 whys deeper, which, we won't go over on a podcast, because that's where you can get like, what I find is like 3 whys deep you can get like publicly, but then the last 2, like if I were to ask why 2 more times, typically you go deep enough to being like, oh, when I was a kid, this, or growing up, that. And while we tend to try and like hide those things, as soon as we unpack what those things are, we can use them as devices in order to really motivate whatever we're doing next. So I don't, in my sort of career, doing a vast majority of things, which I think most 20-somethings do, which are like, I'm an artist, but I'm also an entrepreneur, but I'm also starting, I'm an athlete, I'm doing this, blah, blah, blah. I've done many different things, and part of that's really fun. But then the drawback of doing that is sometimes it's like you're misguided. You don't really know where you're going. You're just doing a thing because the thing was put in front of you. Right? You might even experience this with your music. Someone might give you an opportunity and be like, yeah, like it's a great opportunity. You take it, and then like 2 months down the road, you're like, I hate what I'm doing. This is not fun. And the vast majority of the time, at least for me, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but the vast majority of times for me where I start to feel misguided is when I'm misdirected from my motive. So my why, my 5th why deep, if that makes sense, when I am not aligned with that, that's when I'm like, WTF, what am I doing right now? But if you just stayed with your interest, you'd be like, well, no, I should be doing this. This totally makes sense. I'm a musician, or I'm a filmmaker, I'm insert, job title here. But when you go deep enough, you actually understand why you're doing something, and that will make you make the best decisions forward and know exactly what you want to do. Like this past year, I've made some massive big decisions. One of them leaving my company that I've built that's doing very well, And it was a sad decision because I started with two of my favorite people in the whole world, and the business is actually doing really well. But I had to leave it because it wasn't satisfying that deep why of mine. So, it's an important question to ask ourselves and to dig into. And truly, when we can answer it honestly, we'll be able to make the best decisions. So I challenge you to figure out what that fifth why deep is after the Zoom call, and for your listeners to test it out, because you do get some really juicy stuff at the end.
Yeah, that while you were saying that, I was kind of thinking of, because now a lot of musicians, I mean, a lot of people in general are on TikTok, and they're using TikTok as, following trends and all of that as a way to promote themselves and promote their music and everything. But like, I've been talking to a friend recently about it, and we just cannot get ourselves onto TikTok. And like a number of my friends also just like, we just can't do that because it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel authentic. And I can't follow trends. I just feel like I wouldn't be making the music that I want to be making. And so I suppose that is an example of, deviating from your why.
100%, right? Because you didn't get into music, for you to express those deep emotional things that you're sharing about and how important that is to you. If TikTok isn't, if you're not getting deep emotionally with using TikTok, then you'll never find satisfaction in it, because it's not, like you said, satisfying that deep reason. That said, there is something to be said about platforms and how they can allow us to explore things if we're able to create the glue between our motives, like the thing that we're really, our why, and the thing that we're doing, right? Because at the end of the day, as artists, we do have to make these decisions. A lot of people find great success on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, despite how terrible they can be, even to creativity. And let's not get into, mental health. But there are people who are able to bridge that gap. And I do sort of talk about that in the book, but it's just basically, what are the best tools and resources in order to sustain? It's the same as, I'm a huge lover of the environment. I absolutely love the planet, but I have to drive a car to go to work. Even though I despise, some of the things that I have in my day-to-day life that are, let's say, against the environment, there's certain tools I need to do. And same with YouTube, right? And same with TikTok. So there's a way to modify and at least hack so you can still have your deep why and still be satisfied with that and excel as an artist. And you feel satisfied with both things. And it's really going down to those granular levels and really asking, why is this not working? And how can I bridge that gap? So TikTok can work. I'm with you though. I hate TikTok. I'm also terrible with apps. I'm literally like, I've got reminders on my phone. Like right now I'm locked out of Instagram for the day because I can't open it. Yeah, because I have timers on everything. So I get the whole TikTok thing. You also don't need TikTok to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, but I suppose it is a nice way to get all the views, to gain traction in some ways. But yeah.
I think, that's an important thing to talk about too. A lot of us chase after TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, views, eyeballs, algorithms to get more numbers, to make more money, to hopefully be happier. But the issue with both of these things can be, if we don't know the monetary number that we're trying to get to, you could become a millionaire off of TikTok and still be miserable. And I think that's that's the fruit that we don't really think about as much. We more or less, I think, from being a creative for a long time, the worst parts of my career have always been the times where I strived to catch that low-hanging fruit and disregarded what I actually needed. I obsessed over, oh my God, like I need to have 100,000 subscribers. I gotta have 1 million. I gotta do this thing. And totally lost track of all the other incredible opportunities that were coming my way. And I think that's something we have to take a step back and go, okay, like, well, what is all these views from TikTok going to do for me? Okay, it's going to, best case scenario, give me more viewers for my other platform. Now, what is that going to do for me? Well, I'm going to be able to express myself and talk about these things more. But if, let's say, you're doing TikTok videos or YouTube videos for viewership, and you build a whole platform out of trendy videos, you're never actually going to be able to do what you wanted to do to begin with, because now you're a slave to the clickbaity brand that you've built.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a catch-22, and I think a lot of creatives can get stuck in that cycle. So you should always just start with what feels right, because once it does boom, or if it booms, you're going to be way more satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's hard you can't exactly just ignore the numbers though, especially if it is bringing in an income. Because the more numbers, as you were saying, like the more views, the more numbers, the more money. And if somebody is trying to make that their career, like you can't just completely ignore all of those analytics, I guess, and just kind of do your own thing all the time, because I mean, maybe it'll work, but just like it's a really slow growth and it's a really slow process. And so it's really hard to balance that.
Totally. And we just need to recognize what's the number that we need to hit in order to be successful. Because, right, like, I mean, what was it that the income, at least for Canadians, I think, like to be happy was like, I think it was like 75 grand a year or something. Like that's like, and then anything beyond that, people actually don't get any more happy, or they don't, their means have been set. And then anything beyond that number, it's just sort of like bonus. But yet in our heads, it's programmed to be like, no, like I got to make bank. I got to make 100K, 200K. Next year, I'm making 300K a year. And it's like, why? Like, so you can have another car, so you can buy the next best Tesla, you know, the new pair of Nikes. So to be able to figure out, okay, what's your need, and then work backwards from that might be the better thing for, I think, all creatives who are getting into this. Because at the end of the day, we can't pay our bills by opportunities, favors, and likes on YouTube videos. We actually have to make money from this. So how do we make money from this, but also not chase the dragon per se, chase that monetary low-hanging fruit that's in our heads, so, or high-hanging fruit for some of us.
Yeah, definitely. So you talked about your goal of hitting 1 million subscribers on YouTube. What is your reasoning, your why for that? Why is that success for you?
Yeah, so it's actually changed. So when I wrote the book, I definitely had a goal for reaching a big subscriber count. And now it's definitely changed, because I recognized that I don't need to have millions of online followers in order to make an impact. And actually the release of the book really illustrated that. You know, it's sold tons of copies. I'm getting plenty of friends from all aspects of my life messaging me about it. And it really does illustrate the fact that, you know, you don't need to change the lives of millions. Even if you're able to impact one or two around you, you're doing a good thing. And if I go deep into my why, I want to create the content that did that for me as a kid. So growing up, I didn't have a lot of things, mostly because I grew up with a laundry list of food allergies that made me limited to being able to experience most average things that kids got to experience as children. So going out at recess, you know, traveling, having a regular classroom. Like I was trapped in the same class, not trapped, that sounds really scary, but I was in the same classroom from kindergarten to grade 8 with the same kids, same teachers, you name it, same sort of environment, 6 kids in a room. And so a very obscure upbringing, and watching movies and being inspired by film really helped me out of some of the darkest days of my life. And I want to create content that does that for other people who are in a similar position that I was in. And I don't need to do that for millions of people. I don't even need to do it for hundreds of thousands of people. If I got to impact 2 or 3 people on my time being here, like that's pretty awesome. And I think if we all sort of just strive to impact one person, we would get the entire planet, you know? Mm-hmm. So the idea, like we have the resources and assets to access billions of people, which I think is a very overwhelming thing as being a creative. For the first time in history, literally millions of people have access to communicating to billions of people. Like, how mind-blowing is that? Like, someone 100 years ago would be like, I would love to impact my grandma. And that's it. Like, that's like the one person they probably know their other family members. But now it's like, I want to impact this person in India, and you can impact millions of people. So I think just dialing it back and and this is something I do talk about, but it's like, instead of aiming towards hitting these high number goals, shrink your room, shrink your gaze, and go, hey, can I affect the people in my room? Okay, did it. Can I affect the people on the outside of that? Okay, cool, I can do that. As opposed to, looking at this large fishbowl of millions of people. So it's changed for me. Now it's no longer millions. I'm fortunate enough that my YouTube channel is close to 100K, and I feel very fortunate about that. And my movies have affected, plenty of people, and I think I'm just going to keep doing that.
Would still be cool though, like once you do hit 1 million, which I'm sure will happen someday.
It would be very cool, but I'm not gonna. You lose the joys of the present when you focus on the potentials of the future, and that's sort of what focusing on YouTube numbers and metrics can do to you.
You mentioned a couple of things that I was kind of interesting, like how films affected you growing up, and I was kind of thinking in parallel with how music affected me growing up. And you make films now for other people to watch, but so do you make films with that in mind? Like you're impacting, having an influence on other people, so you're kind of making this thing for them? Or do you kind of have the idea for yourself and then you release it and it happens to affect other people?
I think it's the second one. That's a really good question. For me, it's always been like, if I keep an idea, I honestly think I would be one of those people who talk to themselves. Like you pass by, you're like, who are they talking to? That would be me if I didn't get to make movies. Because I am that. Like my poor girlfriend has to deal with me walking around the house, like staring at the wall like a crazy person, or talking to myself because I just have all these ideas circulating. And so I'm very fortunate that I have a tool to express that. So in order for me not to be a crazy person, I like to make films. And fortunately enough, those films express an inner creativity in mine that I hope, I'd like to think that can inspire other people's creativity. And so it's kind of a win-win. I'd like to romanticize over the fact that, making movies, my specific interest is to inspire other people. But if I really was serious about it, it's just to unleash that inner creative crazy that if I lock up, I become a complete crazy person.
Yeah.
How about you? What's your reasoning? What's your thing?
So, because I've made music purely for myself pretty much always. Like it's kind of a selfish thing. I love making music. It helps me, as I mentioned, express my thoughts and feelings, blah, blah, blah. But like in recent years, I've been releasing it onto Spotify, whatever else. Like it's out there in the world now, and I've received a lot of feedback from it and how a song has affected them, influenced them, or how it's resonated with them. And now I want more of that. Like now I want to connect with all the people and somehow my music is able to do that. But I also think it's just kind of like a win-win situation where it just happened that way. Like I didn't make the music with the intention of I want this person to hear it and I want them to feel this way about it. It's like, well, this just came out of me and this thing exists and I guess it relates to some other people, which is really cool.
Yeah, as I can definitely relate to that, and not to get all woo-woo, but it can feel like some of your listeners will probably like channel off at this point or tune the channel, but I feel like there's like a future version of yourself or a higher version of yourself, and when you get into that like creative flow state, you tap into that version of you who is like already done it, super successful at whatever they've done. They're happy, they're feeling good. And if we think about multiverse, I don't know if you've ever watched like Everything Everywhere All at Once. They do a really good job.
Great.
It's incredible,
yes.
Incredible, right?
I cried at Rocks.
Oh my God, that was the scene that I cried at. I was literally talking to my girlfriend. I'm like, never have I thought I'd cry at Rocks with googly eyes.
Right?
But it happened.
If people haven't watched it, you got to go watch it.
Yeah, and if you guys are listening, you're like, how do you cry at googly eyes? Then
what are you talking about?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that movie, you know, it opened my eyes up to, you know, the idea that it's like, okay, like maybe there's a me in another universe who's like super duper happy and successful and isn't in the rat race and like, you know, has made all the movies, done all the impact. And any time that I tap into a flow state, which I think, you know, your listeners or even yourself know what that is like, where you're just sort of like, where is this download coming from? I'm writing these lyrics, I'm writing this movie, like, whoa, you know, we all get it. And you know, it's just a frame of mind, but I feel like when I tap into that, it's me tapping into future Zach, who's already, you know, pure success and happy. And he's like, Zach, listen, like, here's the download.
Aw.
And I get it. And then that's able to make the impact to what it does. So whether that's true or not, I just like to have that mystical view of it all.
That's super cool. I never thought about it that way. Definitely, like, I feel the flow and everything, but I never thought of, like, that's future me and everything's great.
Yeah, and you know, and perhaps when we go against that, that's when we feel the least happy because we're not channeling into that future version of ourselves that is successful. And when I say success, I don't want anyone to listen to this thinking that I'm talking about money, big house, whatever. Like in my head, success is actually being just happy with what you have. And I think the lack of success is therefore is the person who obsesses over the monetary or, you know, other sort of gains that don't necessarily bring full happiness. So when I say I'm channeling into successful Zach, that's the, you know, the person who is just happy with what they have.
That's really freeing, actually. That brings a lot of comfort to think that, you know, things will be okay and that future me is perfectly fine, happy. They're living their life. And like, I'll get there.
And perhaps maybe they're like, what the frig? Like, why are you so upset right now? You're upset over things that don't matter from future you, right? Like, I mean, if you think about, because the reason why I started thinking about that is guarantee we all think about younger version of ourselves, right? And you think about, oh, if I could give young Zach, you know, a download, if I give that person something, I would. And maybe you do sometimes. You do the thought where you're like, oh, I'd love to tell him this. And maybe you at that time is feeling something and that's you now giving it to them. This sounds super weird sci-fi, like I just smoked a joint before this. I promise I didn't. But it's just like, if we can give those thoughts to younger version of ourselves, why isn't there something to say that there's a future version of ourselves doing the same thing for us now? Anyway, I'll let your listeners do some psychedelics, lick a frog, and maybe go down that rabbit hole a bit.
Whew. Yeah, that's crazy. That's wild.
And you know what? It's like there's no way we'll ever be able to prove it. The closest probably evidence to this being true is Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is you know, a pretty bold statement, but I don't know. Like you said, it is kind of like, it is a little freeing to just think that maybe that's what it is, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What does a flow state look like for you as a filmmaker, somebody who makes video things? Because for me, like, I just sat right here playing guitar last night, like the same riff for like 2 hours. And like, it was like somebody who would, some outside person, if they saw me, would probably think I'm crazy, like repeating the exact same thing over and over and over again. But, you know, so that's like a music thing for me. But what is it like as for film and video for you?
First off, I love musicians in their flow state, and I have so many questions about mirrored questions for you, because one of my favorite things back in the day, I used to do a lot of music videos for bands, and my favorite thing was sitting in with bands as they would do their jam sessions. Like, I was fortunate enough to be like, we would have like a meeting with the band, and then they're like, oh, we have a jam session. I'd be like, oh, can I sit in on it? And I get to sit in and watch them like get into this zone. I was like, whoa. And I think creative flow states, while the instruments are different, the practices are relatively the same when it comes to getting into that part of your brain. And for me, that creative flow state sort of, it's funny because I'm editing a movie and I can really relate to where you're at with your music, which is I have a timeline. And so there's all of my footage on this like one board, and there are 5 shots that then I cut to music. And I, like a crazy person, reassemble the shots like puzzle pieces that can interchange. And I'm like, does this combination work? Nah. Does this combination work? Nah. And it's literally like, I don't know, 5, whatever it is. Like there's like, 100 different options out of those 5 different shots being reorganized. And you're just constantly trying to crack a code. And flow state to me is just not recognizing that I spent freaking 5 hours on that. And it's just being like, oh my God, it's like 5 o'clock now. So, and it always is different. And I'm sure it's the same with you, right? It's like, depending on what tool you're using is sometimes a different flow state. Like could be the guitar, for me, it could be editing something or writing. The beautiful thing about filmmaking is that it's multi-layered. So there is, for the past 3 months, I've been dialing in on this script with my co-writer Neil, or with the writer Neil, and we've been getting into flow states with ideas, and then now it's going from that to now in an editing suite, and before that it was shooting. So you're tapping into these different states, and the best resources around to be able to lubricate that, in my personal opinion, is good sleep and caffeine. So But and how about you? What does flow state sort of look like for you? You're doing the same riff over and over and over again. Are there any other sort of tools or practices that you have that get you into that?
I suppose I haven't actually thought about what gets me into it. Definitely if I try too hard to be like, I want to get into flow, that's not going to happen. Like if I think too much about it and force it, it won't happen. But I think just getting started and then eventually getting rid of distractions for sure. Like if I put my phone away, that's great. That I'll probably get into flow. Because like if I'm practicing flute or something, it might take a while, but it's the same thing, just like getting lost for hours. Time just flies by. But yeah, I'm not really sure if I have specific things that get me into it, I'm realizing. But yeah, or like lyrics will just come, they just form, and suddenly a song is written in like 20 minutes. It's a fully fledged song and it sounds good. If I listen back to it the next day, like it still sounds good. It's great. I suppose yesterday when I was playing guitar, I played similarly, like with your different combinations of your shots. I played the same kind of chord progression, but I in a variation of styles, and yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, and you touched on a good thing. Tapping into flow state is not something where you're like, okay, flow state, let's go, and you're just like in it. It's not like starting a car and the engine turns on. Because we've all been there. Like I'll like sit and stare at a page. I'm like, why isn't it coming? Come on! And I'm like starting the engine, and the car is just like out of gas. And yeah, I think to me, it's just like routine is sort of the best thing, at least for me, to get into some sort of flow state where I'm like, if my days have a structure where I'm like, I wake up at the same time, I work out, I'm healthy. Like I think a healthy body makes for a healthy mind. And if I'm not in the shape to which my body feels good, I'm not going to tap into that. I'm very fortunate that this film, I've been able to tap into a flow state. So we wrote for 3 months, shot for 3 days, and now I've been deep in the edit for 3 days straight now, and it's starting to just look like it went from like beautiful sharp images on a screen to now just like how I see it now is now just like blocks and colors on like a gray slate, and I'm like, so I'm hoping to get some sort of creative fuel back in here.
Yeah. What well, I'm just curious, what do you use to edit?
I use Premiere Pro for when I started getting into filmmaking, it was Final Cut Pro 7. And then Final Cut decided to just be really stupid, and I decided to jump over to Adobe, and I've been with Adobe for the last probably 6 years.
Yeah. What about DaVinci Resolve? Have you ever used that?
I've not. Many people talk about it, and it seems like a really cool thing because of the color grading. I think it's free software, so you're not spending I don't even want to do the math of how much I'm spending on Adobe Premiere per year.
Same.
And it's because I have everything. I have like Premiere and Lightroom, and oh my God, it's just like every month I look at my bank account, I'm like, they took what out? So gone were the days where I had an illegally downloaded version of Final Cut on my computer.
Yeah. So it seems like you're very involved in the whole process of script writing and filming, directing, and the post-production also. Is it kind of just for this project, or do you tend to be a part of the whole process for every one of your projects?
So it's funny because a month ago, I went to chase tornadoes for a documentary with an incredible filmmaker, Mark Bone. And it was the first time that I had ever shot something where I didn't touch the footage in the edit afterwards. It was directly for them. So I didn't have anything to do with the pre-production. I had nothing to do with the post-production. And it was only the production. And that's the first time in, I'd say, about 10 years of doing video where that has popped up. So to answer your question, I am part of always everything till the very bitter end. And it's been like that since I started making movies. And there's not one process that I like more than the other either. Like, I heard Spielberg say this, and not to put myself on his level at all, but I really related to it, which is he says that I love the writing process until it starts to drive me crazy. And then I move on to the shooting process. And then I love shooting until it starts to drive me crazy. And then we move on to editing. And then I love editing until it drives me crazy until we go to produce it. And then once the movie's actually out there and we do the premieres, I like the premieres until I want to start on the next project. And that's like the evolution of making content for me, which is great because I love being hands-on, but also each process drives me crazy. I probably feel like that's what it's like having children. You're like, I love these kids so much until I need to like have a drink and sit by myself this evening until they drive me crazy.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear because, in music, how you have the songwriters and you have the artist who performs and records the song. You also have the recording engineers and the producers and the mix engineers and the mastering engineers. And there are so many people that can be involved in the whole process. But for me, well, also being like a small indie artist where I feel like I'm still just starting out, but like, I don't know, I'm doing like everything by myself, the songwriting, the recording, mixing, mastering, producing, and all that stuff. And it's super fun to me. But also it seems like, like traditionally, if you are with a label or if you've got a band, it seems like the process is that you have a song, you record a demo, and then you go to a professional recording studio, get it produced, recorded, and there's like a whole bunch of people making this, creating this thing with you. And that sounds really nice to have like other people doing things. And so like you don't have to, like, you can be a little hands off. But I love the entire process as well. I don't know, it's in a way, it's not exactly like I want to be in control of everything. Like I've had a friend master one of my tracks for me before, and that was an interesting learning process, like kind of letting go and also having somebody else's opinion, somebody else's ear on it. So that was really cool too. But I do prefer to do everything on my own, and it's nice to hear like other people also can be in the same boat.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on that because it's a really good point. And I feel that gone were the days where the only way to be a successful artist were to do a demo, send it to an agency, that agency hooks you up with the whole team, and you kind of have to follow through, insert artist story here, where it's like you go to the label does a thing, they give you money, and then they help you build the thing, and then you have to return the money. Like, the musician's trajectory wasn't, it's a different set of steps, but not too different from, let's say, the director or filmmaker's trajectory, where it's like you have to go through the formula, and those formulas still exist and people still follow them. But I feel like gone were the days where that was the only option. Now there are several different options in order to make this work in all facets of creating. I even experienced this writing my book. I don't have to be a solo self-published artist. I also don't have to go with an agency. Like for me to go with an agency or find like a HarperCollins out there, like a big agency, like that's like steps. And I had to wait like years. And there was another thing that cost me like $30,000. I'm like, I don't have that money. Like, where am I going to put that in there? And then, I made sort of my own hybrid approach, which was kind of going through Amazon KDP and getting that to sort of make it, and then also sort of leveraging the audience that I built online and friendships and stuff. So kind of doing a hybrid, and the same goes for filmmaking. And I want to touch on the movie that I just finished making because that was no solo effort. That was a large team. I say large in the aspect of filming; it's very small, but we had about 15 people making the film. I was directing, editing, kind of producing, and concept story editing, that sort of stuff. But even though those are 5 hats, there were still 15 to be filled, and those were actors, producers, cinematographer, an incredible writer, post-production sound, musicians. So in this collaborative art, there are still many hats to be worn, but I think there is a way to, if you can, to take on more hats in order to have a little bit more, I don't want to say control, but have more of your footprint on the final vision. Because I have worked in environments where there have been even more collaborators or other brains in the space, whether it's even working on, let's say, a commercial for a brand. And typically in those environments, it's not as freeing, and you'd be like, oh my God, like I did a commercial a year ago where, there was an agency, there was people hovering over my shoulder, there was production designer, there was this and that and this and that. And on one aspect, it was beautiful. I was like, I just get to like step away and just direct. This is the dream come true. But then the other part was, like I had to do the same shot 15 times because the spaghetti was in the wrong position. So there is a constant, where do I sit and navigate? And I think repetition makes the master in regards to figuring out, well, what is the perfect dynamic for me? And what I found was this past project was really leaning into having core members that really, I think the best collaboration is finding those who do the things that you're not the best at, and finding people who are incredibly skilled. And that's like taking a step at yourself and being like, what am I okay at, and just need to find someone excellent in. And I'm very fortunate that with this past project and with other projects, I've surrounded by just unbelievably excellent people out there I love so much.
Yeah, it's really nice if you find the people that you can click with, and that makes teamwork makes the dream work.
It does. And there's a great quote, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it's something I repeat in my head all the time, because like you, I would say, 80% of the time I'm a solo artist. I'm making movies by myself. I'm shooting, editing, directing, pumping them out, whether it's documentary, YouTube videos, and now even like doing the post-production on this movie. Like I'm kind of the only person in the space, minus a post-production sound guy. And so, it's a solo effort. And I think it's important to know, if you are wanting to lead the charge on something, being a musician, or for me, it's like as a director, you need to know the hats of every department. And I think the best way to do it is just to dabble in all of them, because it's really hard to lead the charge if you don't know what people are doing. You're just kind of like, oh, this thing, and like, trust me, that's the position I've found myself in sometimes, where I'm like, I don't know wardrobe. I don't even know how to change myself. And it's like, I'm the most lost in that department, but I'm like, okay, this is something I need to learn about. So on this past film, it was something that I became a little more hands-on in. So I'm definitely going off the rails here, but overall, I think if you can find that middle space and not just go down the path that had been, the trail had been blazed by someone else, and kind of carving your own center spot, which bookends exactly to where we started on this conversation. And I think that works well with figuring out your thing, because there's so many options now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the film that you're working on now, is this the one that you're submitting for Buffer Festival?
Yeah, so I am currently staring at, I keep looking over here like you can see it, but I'm looking at the film right now, which is a short science fiction film that I'll be submitting to Buffer Festival, premiering August, I think 26th or around that day, that same weekend, in Toronto, Ontario. It's a sci-fi film told from the perspective of a young girl who's trapped in a smart home, and the smart home's driving her crazy, and some crazy stuff goes down. So that's what I'm currently staring at, and I have the window of about a month to get it done. So it'll be fun.
How close do you think you are to getting done?
I mean, I always go into these things confident and then usually leave like with my tail between my legs. So at this very moment, I'm in the confidence stage. So I should be done first edit in like by tomorrow or end of tomorrow. And then, I mean, that's the confidence coming in. And then it's like, okay, then it's got to go VFX and sound effects and post-production sound and revisions through people and yada yada yada, all the boring stuff. But right now the fun process is leaving me confident.
That's great. It's a good place to be.
Yeah. And how about you? What's up for music? Are you working on an album right now, or just riffing on individual songs?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think an album, but I suppose it's really just a couple of original like singles at the moment that I've been kind of putting out, and covers also. Actually, you mentioned this in your book that Sarah Dietschy said, the one for you, one for them thing, which I also knew about before I read your book, because, Sarah Dietschy's awesome. She's cool. Cool tech YouTuber. But yeah, the one for me, one for them thing, it's not exactly one for me, one for them, but this idea of doing an original and doing a cover, and then putting them out kind of in that order, in that pattern, I figured was kind of similar to that idea.
It's a healthy way to, I think, do anything. If you're constantly like the one for me, one for you thing, for your listeners who want a bit of context on it, it's essentially creating content that satisfies your internal urge as a creative. So for me, it's like making this short film. And then the one for you is, so that's the one for me. And then the one for you is me doing a behind the scenes of how I made it. Because it'll be educational. It'll be something to teach some people about something. And it's getting into that sort of rhythm that's really helpful. And you do it with covers and you do originals, which I absolutely love because it works. My favorite artists that I've discovered on Spotify, for example, are those who I found covers of to other songs. And then I go down the rabbit hole of their own music. So you're doing the right thing. From a listener,
Nice.
you're nailing it.
Yay. We love validation. Yeah. That and composing a lot, writing a lot of compositions. I would love to get into film scoring, but I don't know how to like get into that world. Like, how do you find musicians to work with?
It's so funny because I'm literally in the boat of composing, trying to find a composer for this film. The process for me has always been, I've had a handful of artists who I've been fortunate enough to work with in the past, who've composed a few of my projects, and so I'll reach out to them first. This project specifically, I am actually using the platform MusicBed for a lot of their scores, and they've got just a good selection of songs. And the reason why I'm going through that on this project specifically is because the scores all sound like they've had months to work on. Like they're full compositions. And when you work on a movie in such a tight timeline, like if I were to get a composer on the project now, I'm only giving the artist, a couple weeks to really compose something that the expectation of the project to have a song that has had months to work on. So I really hate to be that asshole director who's like, hey, can you get like a whole orchestra in here for like in like a week and have that turned around in a day? So I'm going with pre-composed music as a step out of my comfort zone too, because typically I get custom tracks done. And this is me sort of implementing that more YouTuber filmmaking on a scripted narrative film. So you'll see, I'll share it with you. And you'll be like, Zach, the score sucks. Or, hey, it actually worked. Right now, this is where I'm hitting my head off the wall because I'm like, it needs to be custom. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have like, or you could do like, I mean, I don't know what you want to do, but I mean, what if it was a mix of like some custom sections but the majority is still the music bed stuff.
That's
But if
actually
you
a really
really
good
wanted
idea.
custom music,
Okay. That's actually a great idea. Okay, well, your listeners heard it first. This is where the idea was born. That actually might be the best thing.
oh yeah, okay.
Also
Just a thought.
send me over your music that you've tinkered with as far as like composing. That'd be so cool to hear.
Sure,
All right.
sure.
Great.
Also, this is now like the motivation to get this podcast. All my podcast episodes edited and out before not too long. 'Cause I've been sitting on some for a while.
I'm sure it's no small feat. I think it's probably pretty daunting to like open up the edit and zip through all these things too.
Yeah, but it's super fun. It's super cool. And like all these conversations are super inspiring for me. And so I kind of feel like, and plus, given a little bit of time between recording and editing, it's kind of like I get to re-listen to the whole episode as a listener because I've forgotten some of the things that we talked about. And so it's cool. I get like new insights.
That's so amazing that your podcast can inspire you. Like the fact that your own art actually helps you out. It's funny because I went through that with the book. Like I didn't read it for like a year, and then when we were about to publish it, I started reading it again and like just rereading chapters, and I was like, "Huh, that's not a bad point, self."
Yeah, right.
So it can be helpful in that regard too. So it's really good that you're making these catalogs, and you have such a knack at doing this, or such a good skill at doing it. So I really appreciate you having me on your podcast and sharing some thoughts and words about the creative process.
Yeah, it's super cool. It like because we're all creatives, but we're doing it kind of in different fields, but we can still relate to things. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's wild how much of it intertwines. You know, hearing your flow state process, how you come up with songs is very parallel to, you know, it's the same similar process, just different tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, back to the flow state thing, I suppose kind of like on the opposite end of the spectrum where flow is, would you say that the other side is burnout? Because if you're trying so hard to get into flow and we're saying like you can't just sit there and be like tap into flow and it's happening. Do you think that, because I kind of think that the more that I try to, if I'm like, I really want to write a song and release it, like I can't, or I really want to compose something, it just won't happen. It won't come. And the more I think about it, the more I try, like the less I actually do.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I don't necessarily know if the the opposite I guess would be burnout. But if you think of it as like different lines on like a chart, I think flow state is just this like upward, like it goes and it kind of like propels upwards as far as like a vibe chart. And then obviously burnout is like pushing really hard and accelerating really hard, and eventually it dips down. But then there's a line in the middle of that, which is just sort of like, which I think inevitably leads to flow state. But there's also sort of a version of us where, you know, you might get hired to compose a project. And, you know, it's not flow state. You're not like, oh my God, gumdrops and rainbows, I'm having the best ideas of my life. But you're like, no, I'm talented enough and I have enough tools and my resources to create something that's good and I feel good about, but I'm not like going into that high and mighty version of myself. And so I think there is a middle version that we can tap into that's not necessarily flow state, and it's not necessarily banging our head against the wall trying to get something to come out. And you know, the vast majority of the time, I think we're kind of dipping in and out between that line and flow state. And then when it starts to go wrong, I think burnout actually comes from us not listening to that higher self that we talked about before. And that's where that version can come from, where it's where we ignore the symbols of flow state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. What do you do to recover from burnout? Unless you've just never been burnt out before and you're coasting, you're always in flow.
Oh no, I mean I feel like I dance with burnout. I think the remedy to burnout comes from alignment. And like I said, when we tap into burnout, it's because we're not operating off of things that align with us. So this project I'm working on right now totally aligns with me, and I'm really excited about it. But perhaps the timeline is not something that aligns with me. So if I start stressing over, I got to get it done, I got to get it published, then that pressure removes me from the beauty of flowing in doing the edit. And how I can repair that is just to remove that invisible pressure. I think burnout is created through a good chunk of it is created through illusions that we make in our own head. I gotta make this delivery for this deadline. I gotta make money. I gotta do this thing. And maybe that's true. But, a lot of us creatives, if we are facing burnout, then chances are we're actually doing really well, because then we're doing so much that takes us to that point. And the reason why we're burning out is because we're saying yes to too many things, right? We're writing too many songs. We're saying yes to too many client opportunities. We're shooting too many videos. And that's where we start to go out of alignment. So you're doing pretty well if you are tapping into burnout, which is a shitty thing to say, but it's like my grandma always says, it's better to be looking at work than looking for work. So you've gone into the work mode, but you're just not doing it with the right mindset. Either you're putting too much pressure on yourself, you're operating off of insecurity. One of the main reasons why I had to leave the company that I was building this year was because I was just feeling burnt out all the time. And, I couldn't juggle being an entrepreneur for a business that was so different from my primary passion. And while the business tapped into a personal passion of mine as like an individual, my higher self version couldn't cling on to it. And that's where it felt like I was not operating the best version of my space. So like once a week, I was just feeling so drained. So I think the remedy is alignment and just removing pressure. And sometimes it's just like taking a break, but I really think it's just taking a look at what makes me feel really good about what I do and how can I do more of that.
Yeah, that's great.
How about you? What's your tool? Do you have one? Do you even burn out?
Yeah, I was pretty burnt out from Twitch streaming like 2 months ago. But it just so happened that I was leaving for some trips then. Like I went to Toronto, went to Jasper. It forced me to step away from streaming, to step away from creating, to do like any of this music stuff that I'm doing now. And it's a much needed break. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things, just to do something completely opposite from what you're always working on. But also as who I am as a person, I don't think if it weren't for those trips and if I didn't leave this room, I probably would just sulk in my burnout and just be stuck there forever. Yeah. Physically going somewhere else is changing up your environment is nice. Gain some new perspectives, get inspired by something else.
Yeah, one of the sayings that just resonates to me more and more each day is you're a product of your environment. And I take that on so many accounts, but what you're bringing up is that exactly right. It's like if you're in your studio every day, then you are a product of your work. You're just constantly looking at your keyboard, your computer screen, your microphone. You're like, create, do something, Twitch. And then you look at, and then, now our new environment is online. So we open up our Twitch, our YouTube, and now all of a sudden we're a product of that environment. And so it's like, I'm either in my office or I'm in my digital world. And when you take a trip, you go spend some time with family, you go even on a hike in nature, then all of a sudden you start to become a product of that. At least that's for me. I have my nature escapes that I like to do all the time. And then all of a sudden I tap into that environment, which really I think helps out quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that when I moved away from Calgary to live in Toronto for a bit, downtown Toronto was just all skyscrapers and everything. I love being back home in Calgary so much. We're so close to the mountains, so many hikes. It's so nice.
I'm so jealous. How often do you go down to Jasper and stuff?
Well, Jasper is further up, so
Further.
not
Sorry,
often,
Lake Louise.
but
You're close to Lake
yeah,
Louise, right?
like Banff, Canmore, Kananaskis. Every couple of weekends we kind of make a trip out there.
I'm so jealous.
I know, but like with gas prices now, and kind of hurts a little every time.
Yeah, because you have to walk there every time now. Anyone listening, that's like probably a day walk to get there.
Probably.
Yeah. But us as Canadians, we like to walk to our mountains. That's a thing.
Yeah, we walk across the whole country. That's how we get to places.
Yeah, yeah. So it must have been quite the trip going from Toronto to Calgary.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just really curious to know about your company. Like, what is this? You said it's different from. I'm assuming it's different from your filmmaking stuff.
Yeah, it's very different. So. So the company is a cold exposure company called Unbounded. It's an unbelievable organization that we've been able to build. So here in Canada, as you know, we get winter and we get cold weather, and
what is that? What?
Yeah, right. And if you don't live in Calgary or near the mountains, most of us Canadians live in denial for about 6 months of the year, and we just get angry and upset that it's so cold. And so myself and some of my two of my best friends decided to build a community and company around cold exposure, which is the act of going into ice water for 2 minutes plus, between 2 to 4 minutes, for the physical benefits. That is a laundry list of them, including reducing inflammation, better mental health. It helps cure things like cancer, and also just helps with immune boosting. And the more we did it, the more we found those benefits. But overall, I found it as a huge mood booster, especially during times of COVID. And so what started as this fun little activity that we would do ended up growing into a big community. We found out there was dozens and now hundreds of other crazy Canadians who wanted to do this as well. Not for the fact of doing something crazy, but for doing the fact of feeling alive. And now we have a community of now a few thousand who participate in doing this across Canada and now into the States. And it, my departure from that has no reflection of the beauty of what that company is, because I look at it every day and I just I want to cry. I'm so happy of how everything is going, and still very much a part of so many parts of that machine. But if I were to look at my timeline of being a filmmaker and then also wanting to publish a book, as well as YouTube, and also wanting to live my own life, having a business is not a part-time job. It's not a hobby. It's a full-time effort that you obsess over. And I think it was a pursuit that I loved, but I couldn't obsess over 24/7 because I just had so many other obsessions on my slate.
Well, that's awesome. It's like building a company and juggling all the filmmaking and YouTube and so many different facets of making things.
Yeah, and because I can make things, I felt like I can do it. And I'm sure many of your listeners also can make, if you're a maker, like whether you're a music maker, filmmaker, whatever, chances are you could probably also be an entrepreneur and make a business. But I think the best businesses are the ones that really not just align with your passions, because Unbounded aligns with my passions. Building a cold exposure company aligned very much so with my health and wellness passions, my friendship passions, what I want to do every day, what the kind of company I would love to build. But it didn't jive with my other passions. And it felt like I had two children, or I felt like I was juggling being responsible for too many children. And so I didn't think of a metaphor of getting rid of a child, because I'm like, this is going to go super dark really fast. So we'll just stop with that metaphor and hopefully bounce to something else. It's like getting rid of a child. No.
All right. So Chris asked you, what were some of the challenges you faced early on, and how did you adapt and overcome them?
So, I mean, that's a loaded question, because there's a lot of like I feel like I'm in a constant state of starting. So I always feel like early on is like yesterday. And it's like every time I do something, I'm like, okay, now today, like this is when I'm starting. I'm still a young filmmaker. And so to think of something that I was going through early on or starting, a big challenge, because I have a bunch of answers that are coming up. Like, can we be more specific on what part of what journey? Is it as like a YouTube creator, a filmmaker, living in general?
Which one would you like to pick to
Oh
answer?
no, I don't like that. That's like when someone's like, "What's your favorite movie?" or "What's your favorite genre of music?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know."
Well,
All of them.
what about living in general?
So one of the most difficult challenges, was that what the question was?
The challenges you faced early on and how do you adapt and overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a challenge that I face, and so I don't think I ever have adapted overcoming it. And I think this is one that's universal in all facets of my life, whether I'm in a new room with people or, exploring a new project, which is a thing called imposter syndrome. I feel no matter where I am at in my career, I always think like, oh, like in 5 years, I'll never deal with that because I'll have gained these new skills or done this thing. But I always like wind up on set, arrive into a room filled with people and feel like I don't belong here. I'll be holding a camera and I got hired to do a cool job. I'll be out chasing tornadoes or filming a documentary in some far out place in Ontario and be like, why did they hire me? What am I doing here? What's the whole thing? And, I typically can override that. And it's a tough skill to have, but leveraging a sense of confidence and not feeling guilty about said confidence is one of the greatest things we can tap into, because when we disregard confidence and override it with low self-esteem is when we really become the worst version of ourselves in our craft. And so I've really had to figure out how to tap into confidence. And I think that's something I'm always on a journey of, because whether it's a phone call with a client or on set somewhere, imposter syndrome has always been a reoccurring challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge thing that I bring up a lot in all of these podcast chats, just because I feel like most people feel it, and everybody has different experiences with it, I suppose. But yeah, not a question, but just quickly, DJ just wanted to say thank you and show his appreciation to you. He said, though I am still reading through your book, there are already so many familiar messages and concepts being explored in here. I've also wanted to put these out in the world, but I didn't know how to package and present it, and have constantly talked myself out of starting. He says, I'm glad to have discovered these topics from a perspective and experience, and appreciate that you've shared them with the world. Thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet, DJ. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
You said this earlier on, and I think it's something to bring up, which is the aspect of starting. I think one of the best things any of us can do to get to making it is to start. And it sounds so simple, but just starting almost overrides finishing. It's like, I think when we think about a project, we're always thinking about finishing. We're always thinking about the premiere where we're standing up on stage receiving our award, or that the finished edit of the movie or finished song. And never do we sit there thinking about, oh, I just can't wait to sit in the recording room for 2 weeks straight while I bang my head off a wall. Like that's not the part we think about. And we always obsess over that end result. But I actually think the part we should really just like bite into is just starting, because the vast majority of us are perfectionists or doers. So, and I can speak to most procrastinators because I am one daily. And the greatest remedy to procrastination is just like, it's like putting 10 minutes in. To DJ who said the thing about sharing those messages similar to what the book was. my strategy for writing that book and just getting those messages out, because I felt the exact same thing, was I'm just going to write, like 10 stupid lines of word every day. And I'm just going to write some shitty stuff down. And what that does is it gets me started. And I know once I'm started, I'm going to keep writing. But I'm not, if I go into it being like, I'm going to write this book that's going to change my life, and I think about the end result the whole time, I'm not going to even open the document, because that is a huge shadow to live under. So just starting with the lowest expectation of being like, for me, when I go into an edit, I always start with like the easiest thing. I'm like, I'm just going to do a little montage. I'm just going to like organize some clips. I'm going to write a couple stupid words, and then that gets the wheels turning. So just starting with simple is the best thing.
I think when you asked me what's up for me right now, and you're like, is an album happening kind of thing, I think I'm too afraid to say that an album is happening, because that's a big daunting task. But for sure an album is coming.
All right, you're accountable now. But also, I know what you mean. Yeah, but you're just gonna you're just gonna write a few stupid words, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then an album's gonna be made.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on this podcast. It was awesome.
Hey,
great chat.
You're so good at this. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show and reaching out. You are definitely putting the best foot forward in pursuing this, and I really appreciate your passion, dedication, and incredible questions on this podcast. It was so awesome to speak on it.
Thanks. Where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on the internet. So Instagram is at Zach Ramelan, Zach. I say H because I'm Canadian. Or no, is that what they?
Z.
No, Z. Oh, Z. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up.
But
I say Z.
Also, I realized H, how Australians say it, and they're like H, and I thought that was kind of like, that threw me off. I thought they were just being funny, but that's how they say H, and then we went on a whole tangent about that.
I've had conversations with Americans where I'm like, it's Zach, and they're like, Zed? Like they thought it was Zedach. And they started writing it down. They're like, this is how you spell it? I'm like, no, Zach. They're like, excuse me? What language are you speaking right now? Is this Canadian you're speaking in? So it's ZachRamelan. Zach Ramelan. You can find me on Instagram. Same sort of name for YouTube. And you can find my book, I'm hoping, in some show notes or something. I feel like it's easier than me being https:// Yeah.
I'll link everything.
Yeah, best way to search me up is The Unoriginal Guide to Originality. My name pops up for that. So
sweet.
Googs it and check it out. But yeah, it was such an honor being on this podcast, and good luck with the album, but also more importantly, good luck just getting those songs out.
And you too with the film.
Hey, thank you. I'll have to send you a link once it's done.
Sweet. All right.